Muy buenos días y bienvenidos
Good morning and welcome to a new edition of
ediciones.
Voices in Action.
Tendremos interpretación
We're going to have
español, inglés.
interpretation available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and we will also put in the chat linkages to the different languages. So we want to hear from you, so please send us your questions during the presentation through the chat. Go ahead, Martin. Thank you. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for being with us. My name is Martin Irazubisu, and I work in the Inter-American Development Bank in the Creative and Cultural Industries Division. So we welcome you to this meeting from Washington, D.C. Also, we will be sharing this presentation over social media through our different channels. So we have two guests that are going to be responding to your questions. So I remind you, please do make the comments or ask questions, and we will ask our two speakers your questions. So I have with us Licia Amadio. We talked about how to pronounce her last name. Is it Amadio? Yes, that is correct. And she is a well-known conductor in Latin America. She is an orchestra conductor, but you're going to see that she's much more than a conductor. Ligia has been the first woman that won the Tokyo competition in 1997. In 2001, she received a prize of the best conductor of the year in Brazil, given by the Sao Paulo agency. And after 2006, she has been the titular director of many orchestras. If I were to list them, we would spend the whole morning talking about that. So very welcome, Ligia. Thank you. Thank you. It is an honor.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm honored to be here. I'd like to thank you, and especially the president of the IDB, Mr. Alan Goldfein. It is an honor for me to be here. Thank you very much to all the audience for being here.
Thank you. And also we have Konya Ansaldi, who is connected virtually. She is a very versatile professional, and she likes to say that she is a professional that mutates and evolves over time. She says, I'm not the person that knows the most, but I do learn fast. She is from Argentina, and she was able to build Web 1.0, 1.2. She also has a grand loyalty position on blockchain, and she is in charge of agility in Australia, where she trains different international companies like Globant and Koi Buns. So welcome, Connie, to Voices in Action. Thank you. How are you? And thank you, Martin. Hello, Ligia. Warm greeting, even if from far away. It's an honor to be here with you. Thank you. So I thank the IDB and all of our audience for this great exchange that we're going to be having today. Thank you, Connie. Okay, here at the IDB, we are convinced that the creative industries are a determining factor for job creation and for the economic recovery of the region. But this is not possible if we don't do this with an intersectoral approach. We have to look at this from different perspectives and from different sectors. We are researching, and as of today, we are launching a new study on the gender gaps that exist in creative and cultural industries. And some data that I would like to share with you, 3 facts that are very significant in terms of what we're talking about today. According to the International Labor Organization, 57.2% of the labor force in the creative and cultural industries are women, but not all of these women, in other words, that percentage, isn't reflected in the upper management ranks. According to the Institute of Movies and Argentina, 280 some films were shown in 2018, but few were directed by women. But women represent 85% of the people who work in makeup and wardrobe. So here we see an important angle of the sector. Also in the gastronomic sector, in a report that was presented by Michelin that rewards good performance in restaurants, we see that 9.2% of the world's kitchens are led by women. 9.2% of the chefs are female. And another important fact, when women have decision-making roles, when they are leaders in these industries, these enterprises produce 15% more income than in similar industries. So all of that I put out for discussion, and I would like to begin with you, Ligia. Ligia, what can you tell us about gender gaps, since you are a conductor of a symphonic orchestra in a sector that is largely male-dominated? So what is your perspective? And that will start our conversation.
Martin,
Bastante contemporáneo, ¿no? En el sentido que este término brecha de género ya es algo que la gente en general ni sabe lo que significa, entonces me tomo la libertad de explicar lo que es, ¿no? Es una medida que muestra la distancia entre mujeres y hombres respecto a un mismo indicador. Refleja la brecha existente entre los sexos respecto a las oportunidades de acceso y control de recursos económicos,
And
sociales.
control of economic, social, and cultural resources, amongst others.
En el
So,
de
in the case of cultural industries,
hacer alguna
I
investigación.
decided to do some research because there isn't all that much data. When I'm interviewed, I'm always asked four things. The first thing is the difference between philharmonic and symphonic. So please don't ask me that question. The second question is, have I suffered any discrimination as a woman conductor? And the third question is, why are there so few female conductors? And the fourth, how many female conductors are there? And the only question that is hard to answer is the fourth one. How many female conductors are there? Because only recently were studies, statistical studies done to answer that question. And I wanted to share some of the results with you. So if you would allow me, yes, of course. Could we please put Ligia's presentation on the screen? So this is a very interesting study. Who's afraid of female conductors? And it was written by Emilia Santana, who did a study in Sorbonne in Paris. And I'm not going to get into details about this, but she lays out the history of women in music. Women were always out of the limelight until
eternamente voces femeninas porque las mujeres no podían cantar.
they
Entonces,
included women
afastadas de la
in choirs, so women were often left out of music.
empiezan a ser
And in the 20th century, they began to be part of orchestras, playing in orchestras, but rarely were they conducting that orchestra. The composition was found in recent studies, and there were conductors during the whole history of mankind, but they were basically invisible.
puedo seguir. Entonces, por ejemplo,
So here in this next slide, you can see in the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, up to 1997, there was not a single woman. Just imagine, 1997, that is 25 years ago. So this
de un encuentro
was taken
la música diciendo la
from a meeting,
white
and what it says, white men are the ones who can best interpret the music of white men. So not only do we have no women music, we don't have any music composed by any indigenous group, any Afro-descendants. Now, there
la función maestra.
is
En Brasil,
also an important linguistic distinction. There are no feminine forms of the word conductor. Now, in Brazil, we have begun to say maestrinha, that was first used for Cinquinha Gonzaga, who was born in 1840-something, 1847. And in April of 1895, she was conducting an orchestra. So Brazil there was far ahead of other countries. And back then, Chiquinha Gonzaga was called a maestrinha. But now, the young directors do not want to be called maestrinha. They want to be called maestra. And in some countries like France, there is still no word. In French, it is femme chef d'orchestre, so woman conductor. This Imara, studying at the Sorbonne, studied what had happened in terms of French conductors. And here in 1830, there were important conductors. That would be the case of Nadia Boulanger, Dominique Janet, and Eliane de Cruz. And in the 20th century, they were conducting orchestras made up of women because they were not able to conduct male orchestras. So some people had said that they were conducting little orchestras that played a bit of music. This is another very important French conductor, the first woman to conduct an orchestra on a permanent basis in France, and she created her own orchestra, the Female Orchestra of Paris, and they were very successful with a broad repertoire. But she was to meet a rather sad end. She was evicted from her apartment and she lived in an old people's home. So although it seemed like women were taking a more prominent role at the front of orchestras, that actually never happened. So in 1969, Claire Gibault won a first award at the conservatory. And what was in the newspaper, and it was at the same time, that Neil Armstrong was walking on the moon. So this is what the newspaper said: a man on the moon and a woman conducting an orchestra. So it was that out of the ordinary. And this in 1969. So truly incredible. What the initial pioneers had done had been completely forgotten. Okay, so there is this research in France trying to answer this question. Where are the women? So I can summarize this for you. 97% of the music presented in theaters is music composed by men. Just as they conduct 94% of orchestras and 89% of the cultural institutions that are devoted to music. So this is a study from 2016, I correct myself. So we see a number here. How many conductors are there? Female conductors. 94% of all performances are conducted by men. And I would say that this is a very optimistic calculation, actually. Here we can see other results of this research. 0% of the national theaters in France were conducted by women back in 2016, plus a whole series of data that you can find as part of this research. So here in the United States, there is some very important research on the life of American orchestras, looking at racial, ethnic, and gender diversity in orchestras. And what we can see, and this is a very interesting result, is that as of the time when blind auditions were held, so it's a screen that's put up so no one can see who the musicians were that were playing. It was as of that time that the gap between men and women in the orchestra began to narrow. So this is a very important measure. Now, in terms of the conductors and music directors, these are two different things, but in Spanish we often use the word director for conductor. There's hardly any difference between 2016, I think it's 2006 and 2016. So the women are there in this range
en una franja de 9% más o menos.
Of more or less 9% for female conductors. And male conductors represent 91% in the United States. So it is a rather progressive country in this regard, and they do open up good opportunities for women. So this is a more optimistic view of the current time. Also, there is data on orchestra staff that are getting more and more egalitarian, 57.8% and 42.2%, and also the board members, although board members have stayed more or less level. Men hold almost 60% of the board and women 40%. And this means a lot because these are the people that make the decisions. So there is no true representativity. I wanted to share with you a case that you're all probably familiar with, a very important American musician and conductor, Antonia Bricco, and she conducted at the Berlin Philharmonic. So she was of Dutch origin, but she lived in the United States. She grew up in the United States. Antonia Bricco was never given the opportunity to conduct a mixed or a male orchestra, but she was a great conductor. She had to create her own orchestra, Denver Female Orchestra, and that became the Denver Philharmonic Orchestra as time went by. But she was so important. I wanted to share with you this picture of her conducting an orchestra. I saw this picture and it really did move me. There's another very important study done in England. It is called Done, and it talks about statistics of different composers that are presented worldwide in symphonic orchestras. So in orchestras worldwide, this is what they do. They look at the programming of the 100 orchestras, and the result of this most recent survey from 2021 is that 95% of the works are composed by males. And here we can see a low percentage of Black and Asian composers. And only 5% of the pieces were written by women, and 1.1% were composed by Black and Asian women. So this is a very serious piece of research. And here you can see the name of all of the orchestras that are covered by this research. And it's interesting to see that in the United States, there is a movement. In yellow here, you can see the number of compositions composed by women in these orchestras. You can see Chicago, etc. And the United States is doing quite well. But then if we look at Latin America, here, Argentina, Brazil, on this screen, you can see that there is almost 0% of works composed by women, and that is truly shameful. And here we can see Chile, Uruguay, and Martin, I'm proud to say that the Philharmonic of Montevideo is part of these statistics, and that is back when I was a conductor there. That is the Latin American orchestra that has played the most works by female composers, 18%. So this is very interesting, the fact that we in Latin America really are not giving female composers their due. Thank you very much, Ligia. That was full of data, and that is something that we really appreciate here at the bank. Now we're going to switch sectors, and here I'm going to call on Connie. Connie, as an entrepreneur, as a foundress, she just taught me that word, foundress. We wanted to know about her experience
en cómo experimentas estas brechas.
And what she would say about these gaps. Do you think that they exist, that based on the expertise that you have in the sectors in which you work? I'm not going to tell you about my experience. I wanted to share with you some details so you can double click on them. And what I like to say about women is that what I'm going to say should not generate anxiety. Just pick up on the parts that are important to you and then delve into those parts, continue to study and do research, because the experience of each of us cannot be transferred to others, but what we hear from other people can always be applied to us. And if things don't make sense, just leave it aside. Something I like to say is not that it is hard to break the glass ceiling, it is harder to break into cement minds. And as Ligia said, she gave us the right definition of what this gender gap actually means, and we'll get into that. It's part of our culture. We know exactly what we're talking about. So in order to change this, we have to make certain that we as women can create a change from the inside out, beginning with challenging our own limitations. And Elon Musk tweeted yesterday. What he said yesterday was something that really caught my attention. Let's see if it catches yours. So I'm going to say this first in English. If you don't like reality, ignore it. If you don't like reality, just ignore it. And that has 387,000 likes and 3 million Cs. And I thought that this was a dangerous tweet. Why do I think it's dangerous? Because if we don't like the reality, we have to change that reality. We cannot ignore reality, because otherwise there would have been hundreds of women and hundreds of men too that would have taken action to change a reality that was hostile against us women, and we would have ignored what was happening. For example, today we women wouldn't have been able to vote. We wouldn't have been given suffrage. We wouldn't have gone to university. And we wouldn't be working to close gender gaps in institutions that are as important as the IDB is, that works on a daily basis to close that gap. So let's begin by rethinking all of these trite sayings that we take for granted. I belong to a generation where we were taught that at the age of 22 and with a diploma from a university, we knew what we wanted to do. And we live in a world where we should be able to use different laws. We should base our action on different levels of learning and continue to learn. Continue to learn by being curious, open-minded, and in that way we can not only change ourselves, but we can also change the reality within which we live with the tools that we gradually incorporate into our own lives. I don't know the same thing today that I knew when I graduated from college. There was no internet back then. So I know much more now. So the first thing that we have to do is to challenge one of the most limiting phrases that we women have, which is, "This is not for me." Let's stop saying, "This is not for me." If you're interested, if you like it, if it piques your curiosity, it is for you. And you can learn, you can apply, you can be curious and learn and research. So it is for you. And another limiting attitude is numbers. Numbers that sometimes hit us in the face and that leave us out even before we get started. If I say there are 7% of women that are in charge of technology firms, and that means that I'm one of the 7% for leaders of companies worldwide. But if we do not look at business fields, we're not going to be able to close that gap. There are only 15% of women that do professional training worldwide. So the people responsible for changing that reality and working against Elon Musk and his statement is precisely us as women. So we have to get rid of these mental constraints that stand in our way. We need to get out of the box, not stay within the box. So those are the important messages I want to share with you today. And then those of us who those of you who are connected, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have, because I would gladly give you my view. Thank you very much, Connie. We're now going to have some questions from the audience, and while we wait for the questions to come in, there's something that I want to ask both of you regarding your sectors. If you had to give any advice to the decision makers, the people that can really move the needle, that can produce a quantitative, qualitative change in the topic we're discussing, what advice would that be? Connie? Well, something that I always work on in organizations and in startups too, because you always find the same things everywhere, and in cultural organizations too. For there to be change, you have to force that change through until it becomes a constant. If we want the change to be something that will be naturalized, unfortunately, you have to make people uncomfortable and force that change through. If you wait for it to happen, that's not going to happen, because people tend to do business as usual. They do things as they always have, and that's the way they perceive it. So the first thing that I say is, let's force us all to take small actions that will generate a change, an impact. That would be first. Make ourselves uncomfortable. If we're comfortable, that means that we're not producing a change. That is step one. Great. Ligia?
Yo diría a los políticos que primero hay que concientizarse. ¿no?
I would tell politicians that the first thing we need to do is to become aware, truly and internally, and then we need to put in place mechanisms, policies, and laws to allow equality, true equal opportunity between men and women. Unless we have laws on quotas, for instance, it'll be very hard for people by themselves to become aware. As Connie said, in the early stages, you need to push change, otherwise it'll be business as usual. And women and men must open up to change and truly believe that the possibilities are there for us. We shouldn't be afraid. Let's go ahead and dream.
Esta siguiente pregunta va para las dos.
Good. The next question is for both of you, but it's something that has been very visible in recent
Supimos ver
times through a film that is about a woman conductor played by Kate Blanchett, and again it highlights the way women are represented in the media. And so this is a question for you as a conductor, but also for Connie as a media person. So what about female representation, and how does that influence the education of young girls? What message are we conveying to young girls and young women who may consider a future as conductors? Well, if possible, I would like to show a little bit of the slides.
¿Cómo se representa?
Yeah, I'll go back to that in terms of how a woman conductor is represented. In my own case, I have a very graphic example. Could we put up Lydia's slide, please? Thank you.
Sí, 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 claro.
And in the meantime, of course, feel free. Certainly, there is a media study, and out of millions of news items on women, you will find that generally women are not named in media.
Acá.
Here we go.
Mira, es una investigación que se llama Mujeres.
This is a study on nameless women. That's what it's called. A communication consultant looked at over 14 million news items with specific gender references across 12 countries. Women are named 40 times less in headlines than men. This pattern contributes to the weakening of the figure of women as individuals, which leads to a generalization that creates oblivion and disregard. So when I first started, my name was not published. I was referred to as a woman at the head of the orchestra, the symphony orchestra, the woman with the baton, Miss Brazil. Look at that. The charm of the baton. Classics with female inspiration. A woman conducts OZES, the most important orchestra in Brazil, for the very first time. So a woman. State Symphony opens up to a woman conductor. A woman's symphony. And this one is the worst one. Ipanema girl takes the baton. Isn't that frightful? And this was published, the Ipanema girl. I mean, that's the limit, really. And then Bravo Maestro, the main Brazilian conductors. I'm regarded as a maestro rather than a woman. Scent of a woman, you know, two piano playing siblings and a woman conducting. A conductor will be in charge of such an orchestra, will be conducting the Montevideo Orchestra, woman with the baton, and when we also conducted this. The symphony orchestra will have a woman conducting for the first time in 46 years, and finally a news item the way it should be, and the woman in charge of the orchestra. Maestro Kurt Masur takes over at New York Philharmonic, but I was always just a woman, part of the generic label. I think this helps respond to your question 100%. Thank you very much. Spectacular, Ligia. What you've just shown, I don't know if I should really give you a big hand, cry, be outraged. What you've just said is dreadful. And sometimes we're not even aware of this because you naturalize these things. You stick to the flow of business as usual and somehow naturalize things that shouldn't be that way. There are things that we should change. I started a campaign on LinkedIn last week as I noticed something similar to what Ligia has just pointed out. All those of us who are business founders are referred to in Spanish as founders, when the right word should be foundresses. So I started a campaign and they began changing all of the profiles, writing foundresses. So talking about us correctly. And it's exactly what Ligia has stated. Whenever a woman stands out, it is the gender role that is highlighted rather than her name. And often there are competitions. This is something I also really fight for. And sometimes I decide to stay out of many contests and competitions which are women's competitions. For example, women's startups or women's paintings. And what about men's startups or men's paintings? Why are we setting it apart? Why are we focusing on gender? Why this subdivision into a woman's category? We should all be within the same ecosystem, under the same umbrella, with the same sorts of opportunities, and with the obviously equal percentage. That would be true change, with no need for us to be in a separate category. Thank you very much, Connie. My pleasure. We have a question from our audience. A comment from YouTube, which we find interesting. This is Jimena Varela saying, my blood pressure is sky high after reading your news clippings, as if we women were aliens, ETs. And a question for Connie. Making people feel uneasy, not going backwards, and being bold requires a lot of commitment. And one more thing, Connie, about this is a question from Aida Luz Majoria through LinkedIn. Being outside of the box in conditions of structural inequality in a country, how can you do that as women who already face a whole lot of gaps and difficulties? In case of need, I can repeat one of the questions. Okay, I'll break it up into two, and then we keep going. I understand perfectly well how you're feeling. Look, those of you who know me and those who don't, it took me 20 years to be recognized as a digital leader and a reference person in innovation. It took me 20 years, not just because I'm a woman, but also because when you work in the field of innovation, you will be along a path that takes you several steps ahead of others. So it takes a while until others understand what you're talking about. So if you are confident in terms of what you're doing, don't worry, don't think about shortcuts. The long-term value and reputation building is a long-term effort, but no worries. Keep going, slow but sure, and knowledge is the main ally we can have on our side. It is very difficult to oust someone who is empowered through knowledge, who is armed with knowledge, who is equipped with experience. Besides, we must start to do away with certain old patterns that have conditioned us women, and I myself very much when I was younger, much younger than I am now. You know, for example, the idea that sexy women are not smart. I always like to ask women in the audience how many times they've changed their outfit to go to a meeting to look more serious, more professional, more intelligent, or perhaps to conceal some physical attribute that embellishes them. And they will always raise their hands. And that is also a change that we must drive, because we may be beautiful, sexy, and smart. We can be all of that. As for the second part of the question, how do we manage to jump out of the box, especially in countries like the ones we live in Latin America, where there's a lack of resources and where's, you know, one thing I always like to stress is the importance of belonging to communities. You know, building your own communities and networking with leaders or ecosystems that help us build things. No one does things on their own. So we need to identify communities in which we can find support to build a vision. That is highly valuable. There are a whole lot of networks, increasingly so, and social media are great allies in this regard, and they help us consolidate the things that we don't have or that we need from others. So do rely on these networks to be able to scale up your vision. No one can do things just on their own, and it shouldn't be the case either, right? Thank you very much, Carl. Another question from the audience. This is a question from YouTube. Irene Sierra asks, either one of you or even both, how could we manage to empower young girls from primary schools and all through high school, especially when the male-dominated culture is so embedded in culture and ICTs? Well, of course, not applying the male-dominated culture in schools. It's as simple as that. Teachers and parents must change their mindsets. For instance, me, I had a dad, and when I was 2 years old, he would take me to the factory and I would be crawling on the floor among men. I was an engineer before becoming a musician, and that was a perfectly natural world. I never felt different from anyone else. I think that's what it boils down to. First and foremost, parents and a school can't be a macho-based institution either. It's as simple as that. Picking up on what Ligia said, when it comes to the role of parents, we need to identify what signals we are sending out to our kids, starting by the toys we are giving them, and including the sorts of motivations that we offer. The role of women and money always seem to be at loggerheads, as if that was a bad word. In Latin American schools, in all of them, we should already have a compulsory course on personal finance. Children leave school without knowing how to manage their personal finance. And this is something that you should work on at home and at school. What I'm saying about toys is no minor issues. Dolls may be lovely, but science kits or not just science kits. There are loads of other toys that have always traditionally been linked to men, engineering and building related stuff. And that is also good for girls. Let's no longer stigmatize games and play. That should reflect the interests of kids instead of working on the base of presets. Let's reconsider the messages we are sending our kids, from colors to toys. That's the main thing. And In schools, we clearly need to redesign from the word go the courses we are working on to favor a more competitive and inclusive world. Thanks very much, Connie. We have more questions, lots of questions through the social media. This one comes from Colombia. Beatriz Sanchez, a civil engineer from Colombia, asks both of you, how can you live with peace of mind and keep going without harboring any grudges against a society due to the hurdles, the delegitimization, bullying, and other negative behavior targeting women just because they're women? Wow, that's powerful. Connie, please.
Miren, creo que
Let me say this. Your question has given me food for thought. I'll tell you a little story. I just got back from the South Summit in Brazil, a highly prestigious event on innovation, science, and technology, which is held in Brazil and in Europe, and I was a speaker. I traveled with a group from Argentina, and I was the only woman speaker. I traveled with 20 men, and I was the only woman on stage. And some time ago, someone might have felt proud of this, but I was filled with anguish. And the first thing I wrote on my social media was, girls, I'm the only woman. This is horrid. Raise your voices. Where are you? Let's do something. Let's team up. Insist on this. And what I said on stage was, we need to insist. We need to insist. This is a time that offers the tools to do so, and we can do so. We can raise our visibility. In the past, we used to depend on a newspaper giving us an interview or some kind of portal. Now we can be our own personal brand, and we can build on that and inspire others. You don't need millions. The women around us, friends, mothers, grandmothers, sisters, each one of us can be an inspirational micro leader for others. So let's be that. Be that, because that's how changes take place, from micro change to macro change. That's how major movements take place. They start out with a small, imperceptible wave that then mutates into a hurricane. And you're here listening to Lysia and myself, and you can be leaders of change. Be that. I would also like to respond to that question, as I think it's very deep and very painful. I have no peace of mind. It really hurts a lot to see how much injustice I and other women and friends have suffered during our lives, even to this day. And one way to endure this is, first, if you suffer any sort of aggression, you must report that. That's the first thing. Second, you must team up with other women. Sorority is a feeling that gives you a lot of strength. This is very interesting. After a long career, many years, I decided to help other women conductors through an international symposium of women conductors. And this originated in a meeting with 4 colleagues, women friends, who complained about the same sorts of discrimination and pains. And now we're into the 4th symposium this year. The 3rd one took place during the pandemic. It was fully online, and we had nearly 1,000 conductors from 37 countries around the world, all of them talking about their experiences and sharing with over 200 speakers from a variety of countries. So a movement that started out of pain and anguish, out of not feeling peace of mind, turned into a huge transformative movement. So my advice to the person asking the question is, can you be a vehicle for transformation? Don't be afraid of that. No matter how much it hurts, we need to keep going.
Ligia, ¿tenemos más preguntas?
Thank you very much, Ligia. Do we have more questions? No, just a few comments by several women on Facebook saying what Ligia said about the importance of us women not being torpedoes against women ourselves. We need to fight against this kind of machismo you are talking about. There's a comment on Zoom in English. I will read it out in case you want to speak to that.
What worries me is that I see a predominant focus on I am what my career or my job position is and how successful we are in school. Should we more predominantly express that in the baseline? We are all humans with all types of genders using our full potential day to day, indiscriminatory in our own capacities and equity based. Therefore, we would be imposing less focus on job and academic success as the primary performance indicator.
Claro, bueno, esa es una cuestión humana, ¿no?
Yes, indeed. That is a human thing. Where do you put the focus in your life? I think there are no recipes. It doesn't have to be work or academic success or professional success. We need to seek happiness, right? In our current society, there is a far too great emphasis on us being successful. I don't believe in any of this. I think that happiness lies in the simple things, tending to your garden and things like that. Perhaps seeing a child playing, being with your loved ones. Your career doesn't bring that much happiness. That's the way it is.
No, claro, los seres humanos somos mucho más.
We human beings are much more than just that. Of course, there is a focus on that, but it's not right. We need to focus on what we are as a spirit, as a soul, as living beings, as humans with nature and all that. Yeah, I agree.
Desde ya.
Absolutely, no doubt.
Todo lo que tiene que ver con mi vida y mi motivación.
Everything that has to do with my life and motivation has to do with a purpose and with bringing value to others. And any activity you may engage in, it doesn't have to be technical or scientific, it can be artistic. Whatever gives you pleasure, happiness and joy, as Ligia just said, whatever brings you value, and someone else as well, will certainly fill you with satisfaction and will make you live a full life. Aside from that, when we talk about change and about how to change certain structures or how to be able to establish structures, if we want to do that and we want to really make the changes happen, sometimes we do need to somehow spearhead the process, a bit like Joan of Arc, to bring about the deeper, more profound changes, for it to be less painful for others, for things to flow better for others, and for that to become a natural flow, even though it may have not been that way for ourselves. So I do agree with what was just said. And one last question, please. Thank you, Connie. Yes, on YouTube, Jimena Varela has a question for both of you. How can women, partnering with men, support women in the cultural and creative industries? Could you perhaps give us or share with us 2 experiences, best practices you have seen in terms of how we can support women in these industries? Excellent question to wrap up. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I have done my homework by organizing this symposium, which has opened up many minds, and many have joined this on the path of sorority. And it's not just sorority, because I don't like this thing of women and men at the other end. We're all human beings, and we all need to evolve. So perhaps being less selfish,
fraterno,
more fraternal, and sharing what you've got, not trying to grab it all for yourselves. These are human qualities we need to develop to achieve that goal, which is professional. There's always the human component first. Become better human beings and be fraternal in dealing with your colleagues, whether men or women.
A mí, una de las cosas más importantes que puedo dejar.
One of the main things I could leave with you is that true change is something that takes place with all of us together. And in order for there to be true innovation on a human level, there has to be a diversity of perspectives. If we always look at the same sorts of people, we create a bias and no human innovation takes place. So we need innovation in terms of gender, of age, of ethnicity, of places, of sexuality, of interests. In other words, interact with people who don't think like you. Sometimes we tend to interact with people that think the way we do, that have the same beliefs and say, yes, I agree, I think the same way, or who are our own age or our own gender. And the fact is that in order for us to be able to grow and for our societies to grow, we need to embrace this diversity. And that's the way how human relations inwards and outwards grow productively. That's the best thing I can say. Do make the effort and try and see if you're within an ecosystem that really favors this inclusion at all levels, including abilities and so on. Thanks very much, Connie. Thanks very much to both of you for having shared this moment with you. Some useful information to wrap up. The Creativity and Culture Unit firmly believes that this is the way through dialogue, and the bank does believe that discussing gender is important for our region. This is why today we are launching a study on the gender gaps in the creative and cultural industries, including performing arts, visual arts, audiovisual, music, and video games, and that is already available for download. We think this will be very innovative, and we hope it'll be just the first one of many to be carried out in the region. We hope the IDB will open up this door for others to pick up on, to continue to increase and afford visibility. Thanks very much to our audience on social media. We are told there's quite a few of you out there. We're very pleased to see that this is so important to the region, as demonstrated by the high turnout. We'd like to invite you to our next edition of Voices in Action in May. We'll talk about diversity and inclusion of people with disabilities in creative and cultural industries. Do please take a minute to answer the survey using the QR code. Whatever feedback you may give us will be key for us to provide quality and relevant content for the region. Thank you all. Thank you, Leach and Connie, and congratulations on all of the work you're doing and on really spearheading the mission of opening up people's heads, which is so much needed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin, Leach. It's been a true pleasure. Goodbye, everyone.